Tariff, Free Trade Agreement between New Zealand and the Republic of Korea Amendment Bill, third reading.
The Honourable Tim Grosser.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the Tariff, Free Trade Agreement between New Zealand and the Republic of Korea Amendment Bill now be read a third time. Before I start to make a few comments on the bill, Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate on behalf of, I hope, all the members who supported this bill, the two chief negotiators of this agreement, and through them their extensive interagency teams, Alison Mann, who led the negotiation from its inception in 2009 through to 2011, and Martin Harvey, who took over her responsibility. I know it was an extremely difficult negotiation, and I want to commend them and through them their teams for their very professional and very consistent effort to bring this home. Mr. Speaker, this is obviously going to play a very important role in strengthening our relationship with the Republic of Korea. And I suppose, like many people who have watched the development of Korea over the past 70 years, I am enormously impressed by what they have been able to achieve for their people. And when you reflect on the fact that culturally they are identical to North Korea, that as recently as 1970, North Korea had a higher per capita income than South Korea, because when the terrible war occurred in 1950, most of the industrial capacity of then the one country was in the north, not the south. So the fact that they've been able to achieve what they've achieved has been, I think, one of the most remarkable stories of economic development. And of course, what it's done for us and for many countries other than us is also created huge opportunities for New Zealand exporters. So I have it is a very disturbing notion, indeed it is, that trade is actually good for everybody, but there are a few oddballs like us that believe in this theory, and clearly 46 million Koreans believe in it, and about 18 million in the north don't, and we can see quite clearly the consequence of that choice. In fact, the member who's made this important, although I think a rather ideological point, of course, has probably, like me, seen those photographs from space, taken at night, which shows a complete black space between is it the 53rd or the 51st parallel? I've forgotten the number of it, and the start of the Chinese border, indicating what a wonderful result you get from insisting on your sovereignty and not doing anything with anyone else. Now, back to the knitting. However, we are looking at this bill, Mr. Speaker, through the prism of general policy, which is under strong debate in this country, quite legitimately, of course. And I just want to acknowledge just how important trade policy has been to securing advantages for New Zealand exporters, and no more so than in this very vibrant and exciting market of Korea. If we look back in our history, basically in the 1950s, we were not trading at all with Korea. So the opportunities that we are seeing in the Asia-Pacific region are basically the conjunction of two things. One is a process of economic development in which, well, we may in some cases have made a tiny contribution through our education system that links in with theirs, through our development assistance in earlier days, but fundamentally is the result of these countries' efforts and their adoption of pro-growth, pro-market policies. And then, of course, the negotiations with those emerging economies, Mr. Speaker, to give us access into their markets. Because the process of economic development, while it is transforming the opportunities for our small economy completely for the better, is an essential precondition to this shift in trading structures. We still need access to the middle income consumers, and you do not get that automatically. I've often argued, Mr. Speaker, in the past, that the process of diversification for New Zealand, which started essentially in the 1970s, in a strict economic sense, needed not to have happened had we had access to the middle income consumers of Europe and North America. And therefore, the role of trade policy is absolutely central to our own economic futures and maintaining a vibrant economy that can support a first world health system, a first world education system, and create opportunities for young, ambitious New Zealanders to base their lives and their families' future in our country and not in a third country. So this agreement will absolutely contribute to these broader objectives, Mr. Speaker. On the subject of free trade areas generally, I've been using more recently a statistic that I think is extremely interesting. It's not a rigorous proof because we would need to factor in other considerations that produce this stunning result. But if we look back at New Zealand exports in the last 10 years, between 2008 and 2014, so 6 years, what we see is that our exports to countries with which we do not currently have a preferential agreement, call it loosely an FTA type agreement, have declined every year by an average of 2.6%. So round it down to 2.5%. Every year, our exports have declined 2.5% to the countries that we do not have these preferential access agreements. But to contrast this, the countries that we do have agreements, and I believe the figure is that with Korea, when Korea comes into force, that figure becomes something like 53, 54%. The export growth of our exports to those countries has increased every year by an average of 10.4%. Now, this is the conjunction of a highly successful trade negotiating strategy pursued both by this government and the preceding government, and I made, I think, a completely justifiably strong words of thanks to the opposition for their very constructive, well, the Labour Party, for their very constructive approach throughout this negotiation in one of the readings of the committee stage. And I stand strongly behind those comments. But it has been essential for us to target these emerging markets and create these platforms. And I think this is a major opportunity for New Zealand. I'll repeat another thing that I often say, and I'm sure others do too, and that is that at the end of the day, this agreement doesn't put a new dollar on the table, it creates an opportunity, and it will be up to New Zealand business people, and we will strongly support them to exploit the opportunities of this landmark agreement. The final thing I'd say, Mr. Speaker, is that in a technical sense, what we're doing here is we're not voting in a technical sense on the FTA, but on the legislation that is necessary for New Zealand to be able to ratify the agreement. It is a proxy for exactly the same thing. And in the light of a discussion that I hope this Parliament will have in the not-too-distant future on a certain other rather larger and more controversial trade agreement, it will be exactly the same. So while the legislation, while the Parliament will not be asked in effect to debate a trade agreement per se, unless Parliament passes the necessary legislation to allow a New Zealand government to ratify it, it won't happen. So in a very real sense, when the moment comes, if it does come, this Parliament will be deciding through proxy whether it wants to advance New Zealand's interests through this giant FTA that is still now at a very mature stage. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all of the people who've worked so hard on this agreement. I want to thank the political parties that have supported its passage through the House. I was speaking only, I guess about a week ago, to the Korean Minister of Trade, and he assured me that the passage of this through their own National Assembly is proceeding. And while there's a lot of controversy in Seoul around the FTA with China, this looked reasonably promising on the New Zealand front. So when we have the passage of this bill through the New Zealand Parliament, and we hope in the very near future, the corresponding action through the Korean National Assembly, we'll be able to, at that stage, I think, open a bottle of champagne. Thank you.